guys, thanks for tuning into the podcast. Today we are on our third and final interview of this Funders series that I've had so much fun with that I kind of think I might do it again. And so today you're going to be hearing from a community foundation. And so Brookline Community Foundation is it's actually a suburb of Boston, even though you'll hear Abba describe it as touching the city limits of Boston on three sides. And so I wanted to have a community foundation playing a part in this Funders series, just because it seems like there's a lot of questions of wait, they're fundraising, but then they're also a granting partner. What does that dynamic look like? They're just extra gymnastics sometimes that feel a little weird, and so you'll love Abba as she describes just how she does that dance and what that deep partnership looks like and has to look like for that to work. And so Abba has been in her role, when this goes live, just at that 2-year mark, and it's incredible to hear just the deep work and deep relationships that she's built in that time. So I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, we dispelled myths, all the things. And you'll hear straight from these amazing funding partners in this interview. So I've loved interviewing 3 different types of funding partners, and I hope you've taken some nuggets and kind of can see parts of each conversation, how you might apply those to your current partnerships with funders, and how you might be bolder, and how you might ask for what you need, and hopefully that will transform your bottom line. So enjoy the conversation with Abba Taylor at Brookline Community Foundation. Abba, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Okay, well, I would love for you just to paint the picture here of how Abba got to where she is today here at the Brookline Community Foundation. Give us a little bit of your background, and we'll take the conversation from there, Abba.
Sure. I'm happy to do that. I always say that I don't like talking about myself, but I know we're here for an interview. And I can go on and
it's all
on.
You today.
Please tell me when to stop, because
okay,
my journey to coming to BCF really starts from childhood. My parents are immigrants from West Africa, and I grew up in Boston, and then went to school in the greater Boston area, and had a really strong sense of the haves and have-nots from, an early age. My parents were working class immigrants. I was able to go to, some really elite schools through scholarships. I was a big nerd. So I saw lots of different elements of the world. And I think that instilled in me pretty early on a sense of social justice and trying to understand why some people have and others don't. So by the time I, was sort of in my teenage years, I began to get politically active and just really committing to social justice and equality and equity and, terms that weren't around when I was younger.
Right.
But, the values were always there. So I've spent the last 25 years doing social justice work in one way or the other. I've done it in grassroots organizations, working for nonprofits and philanthropy. I think philanthropy obviously has a very unique role in the ecosystem. And for lots of us who've been on the kind of like nonprofit side, being able to, so to speak, have a seat at the table, if you will, to help with some of the decisions and strategy around resourcing really important work that is building community, is kind of creating opportunities for lots of folks. That's the very short version how I got here.
Good. And then just for people who aren't from the Boston area, and I'm learning Boston with a number of clients there the last couple of years. So Brookline is what to Boston? And, because we think of Boston as a certain way, but paint the picture of who Brookline is serving.
Another really long-winded conversation there, but Brookline is technically a suburb of Boston.
Okay.
It could have easily been a neighborhood in Boston. It's literally surrounded by Boston on three sides. So it's a beautiful hybrid of both kind of, very urban. It's right next to Boston. It's got a lot of access, obviously, but it's its own community. It's its own town. It has its own kind of municipal governance. So there's an interesting kind of relationship between being a suburb, but certainly in lots of ways feeling like almost another neighborhood in the
Yeah.
city of Boston.
So good. And then one more clarifying question. So,
Yeah,
as you know, you're my third part of a three-part series that I'm talking to with funders, which has been so fun for me to interview, kind of flipping the tables. Um, we've interviewed a couple like large kind of different, I'd say, model foundations. Talk if somebody's listening here today and says like, wait, what's Brookline Community Foundation? Talk to me about. Could you just like give me the 411 on what a community foundation is and how maybe your structure might be different and what that looks like for
absolutely.
Brookline.
Yeah, I love answering this question because
Good.
I always say that, again, as someone who is involved in lots of nonprofits, I had a love-hate relationship with philanthropy, to be quite honest, right?
Mm,
Like, the power dynamics with funders and what have you.
right.
And I've worked in and with lots of different kinds of philanthropic organizations. My favorite ones to work for are either public foundations, where the money is, resourced by the public, or community
Yes.
foundations, which is very similar. Community foundations are, place based, very specific to a geography or a demographic group, and they are public foundations. All the money that we give out as a funder, we have to raise. So we're
Yes.
funders who also have to fundraise. The thing that I think that I love about community foundations and what kind of brought me to BCF
Mm,
was the community part, right? It's this notion of everything we do is for our community
yeah.
and, hopefully in partnership with our community. So those values around, democratic with a small d, just participatory engagement in addressing community needs. I think community foundations play such a critical role in
Mm,
that. We saw a demonstration of that when COVID hit, and community
right.
foundations played such an instrumental role in being able to galvanize resources
Yeah.
and
Everywhere.
distribute them in ways that other foundations or anyone who's funding just doesn't have the same relationships both with the local community partners and the
Yeah.
nonprofit organizations or community members. So we really get to be kind of in the nexus of the web again of the ecosystem. I talk a lot
I
about the ecosystem, and
I
community
love that.
foundations play a really strong role in that.
They really do. I see that in so many, in my own community. We have a very
Yeah,
strong community foundation where I live, and it was fun. Kind of. I mean, I'm using the word fun lightly, but fun to watch them mobilize during COVID. So I totally hear
yeah.
that.
Does
So,
that answer the
but
question? Because I want to make sure.
I
Yeah,
think it does. I think people, honestly, they think they should know what a community foundation is, and so they're a little afraid to ask.
yeah,
And I also find that, and same with some of the nonprofits I serve, there's like a weird dynamic of wait, you grant money, but you're fundraising,
yes,
and
yes.
so it's like something isn't adding up, so it adds a little bit of confusion.
Yeah.
Maybe you even feel that with donors or having to explain that a
Yeah.
lot.
The other thing I'll say about community foundations, I always talk about there's a spectrum. You have community foundations that almost serve as like, a local banking system where
Yes,
donors can have their own funds, funder advised,
yeah, like a donor advice fund
donor advised
holder.
funds. Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
Yep.
I'm still
Mm-hmm.
waking up. Donor advised funds, so donors can have funds that are very designated, donor advised or
Yes.
designated funds for a particular area. And that's kind of the most traditional model of community foundations, right? And that's the same model that you see at Fidelity or these kind
Right.
of big banks. And then you have community foundations that, of course, use donor advised funds and designated funds as resources, but also work with the community and do fundraising on an annual basis or what have you
Yeah.
to really pool the collective resources of a
Yeah.
community to give back to the community. And something about Brookline I'm always emphasizing is that uh, because we are a suburb of Boston, People sometimes think, oh, we're this really wealthy community and there's no needs here, and there's no
Yes.
poverty in Brookline, and that couldn't be further from the truth,
Right.
right? But people aren't going to look at our community as the first place people outside of Brookline, when we have higher poverty rates in Boston and other gateway cities or what have you.
Yes.
So the idea of people giving where they live is a real strong emphasis of community foundations. I'm always saying, like, people outside of this community aren't going to be nearly as aware,
Yes.
and frankly nearly as invested in the well-being of this community. So it's up to our community members to make it a better community,
Yeah.
and that's
I
the role
love
that a
that.
community foundation can play.
Yeah. And just thinking of if everyone played their role in their own community,
Yeah.
what would happen, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So Abba, you showed up. You're going to
Uh-huh.
tell me how many years you've been in Brookline. You showed up, you assessed the situation, you moved into planning. Talk to me about just where the community foundation is going, how what types of innovation that you're putting into play. Like, tell me where you are today and where you're taking the organization.
Yeah. Oof, I love that.
I
So
know
I've
you've got a plan.
I've only been with Brookline Community Foundation for a little. It'll be 2 years in October.
Wow.
So it's been 2 very short and very long years. And I think I cannot deny that coming out of the heels, of COVID has
Mhm.
played a huge part in thinking about what our future looks like, right?
Yeah.
As we think about the services, the needs of the community, and the sort of dwindling of resources that
Yeah.
were available during COVID. There's a role that community foundations can play. So I think a lot about what is our role moving forward.
Yeah.
People talk a lot about the American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, the cliff that so many nonprofits are going to hit at the end of
Mhm.
2026 when all of that federal funding dries up or is spent down. And so I think there's a place for us to be there and start trying to position ourselves. Also, at BCF is obviously short for Brookline Community Foundation. We put out a report last year in 2023 called Understanding Brookline.
Hmm.
It was based off of census data and other information. We did it 10 years prior to that, where we really get to take a deeper dive in our community and look at what's happening, some of the disparities. And our headline for this report was that 25% of our community is financially insecure.
Wow. A
Yeah,
quarter.
yes. So 1 out of every 4 of our residents, and people just would not necessarily know that. Again, thinking about
Right.
Brookline as this, wealthy suburb, which it is. There's lots of, privilege.
Yes.
And what we often say is Brookline is a very well-resourced suburb, but it's not equitably resourced. So there are
Yes.
people who are doing great. There are people who are really struggling. You can see the lines around the food pantry. We know about, the homelessness of young people in our school system.
Mm.
There are all these things that if you're not kind of working in this part of, the ecosystem, then you may not be aware of it.
Right.
So we really want to bring to light the economic inequality that is in our community. And I think that a next step in kind of flagging and illuminating economic inequality is really pushing economic mobility. What does
Mm.
it mean for everybody to be able to not just survive, but thrive, but
Right.
right, like beyond getting the basic social services to make it day to day, like how can people actually feel the well-being of folks, both
Yes.
economically, mentally, socially, emotionally. So thinking again about a role that a community foundation can do to promote economic mobility, with our most quote vulnerable
Yeah.
community members. And for that, it's low income folks, it's seniors, it's young people, it's children who are living in poverty. It crosses all kinds of
Right.
age and race demographics. And so those are the things I'm hoping we can, as a community foundation, really work towards in the future, in
I
the near
love it.
future.
Yeah, this is where I say fundraising is education because
Yeah,
even though it might be right there in our community,
yeah,
sadly just become numb or it just somehow becomes invisible when it's right there in front of
yeah,
us too often.
yeah,
So it's kind of waking people up and saying, no, yeah, it was 1 in 4. No,
yeah.
here's what that looks like.
And to your point, with community foundations, fundraising is particularly tricky, right? Because people are like, "Oh, you're a funder. You don't," and it's
Right.
like, "We have to
You give
fundraise.
money. Yeah.
We give money," but we also have to play a really careful, line and do a really careful dance between not competing, so to speak, with the
Yes.
organizations that we fund, because we are technically tapping the same donors in the same communities. And so we always have to both think about partnership, what does collaboration look like? How do we people understand the value add of a community foundation without detracting resources from the same organizations that we will provide funding for?
Right.
Um,
Right.
it's a very unique place to be in as a funder who fundraises.
Yeah, it's a little mental gymnastics, I would think, of like any meeting or relationship or who knows who, or just being cautious so that
Yeah.
the funding benefits everybody.
But that's where
Okay,
the donor
so yeah,
education comes in,
you nailed it.
and just helping donors understand
Yeah,
the value add for community foundations, for the organizations that we support
yeah,
collaboratively, what have you.
yeah, so good. Okay, so the organizations you are supporting, so
Mhm.
um do you feel like how have you approached even just relationship building? I mean, like I would think that's a lot of organizations to get to know, to feel
Yeah.
like to understand the landscape, to see how they still fit in your future plans, or like how has that whole assessment been for you in really, I mean, forming relationships with all the people that who are stakeholders in the work that you're doing, but also people that you're considering funding.
Yeah, again, the beauty of being a community foundation is really being in the community, and
They'll come
so
find you, right?
they know where to find me.
Yeah.
Here, open door policy in some ways, right? But when I first started, my first couple of months was just about kind of going on what we would maybe call a listening tour or what have
Hmm.
you, right? Like one of our values is lead by listening,
Mm.
and so again, we want to do what we do for the community with being informed by the community, not necessarily just by what BCF or ABBA thinks is needed,
Yes.
right? So, community engagement is such a huge part of my job. And, meeting with, working with, speaking with everybody, like everybody all
Yeah.
the time. It is all about relationships, and
Yeah.
it's tricky because people also, have relationships with me knowing I'm a funder, one of the biggest funders in the community. And it doesn't necessarily always mean, oh, this is going to result in a grant, right?
Right.
Those relationships, and sometimes it's advising or research. Like I said, our report that we just came out with is a great tool for lots of organizations to make the case to other funders or to other partners about real data that BCF has collected and disseminated. So the thing that I also say about community foundations, like we're not just a funder. We do convenings, we do research. We really bring people together. Something that we did, I relaunched last spring, was an executive directors roundtable. So it's an
Mm.
opportunity for all the executive directors of the nonprofits in our community. And just BCF alone, we have about 50 partner
Wow.
organizations that we fund. More than that, actually, I would say, but roughly speaking,
Yeah.
and not all 50 were there at this convening, but the idea is for us to again think about really collective impact, right?
Yeah.
One organ, the food pantry or the youth center or what have you, they all do amazing work. And what does it look like for us to think more holistically about all the entry points of the work we're doing to change? Like, what
Yes.
are areas of need? So again, this is a role that I think community foundations and BCF are really best poised to play.
Yeah.
But it does mean lots of relationship, management and engagement all the time. And then of course
Yeah.
the donors, right? Like fundraising.
Then
So
there's all them. Yeah.
there's all the donors and all the community partners. I
Oh
don't know
my
if that answered
goodness.
your question. Did I answer your
It
question?
does.
Okay.
Yes, you're answering all of them. I created this series, I guess I'll call it, because I think I told you when we initially chatted, I was on this webinar with the Chronicle of Philanthropy, and it was about securing general operating revenue and just just the deep relationship that you have to have between,
Yeah.
grantee, grantor, to be sitting down and having those honest conversations. Um, and so so I love that's what you're describing. It's like, no, we have to take the time. We got to
Yeah.
get to know each other so we can sit down and have the tough conversations, the honest conversations.
Yeah.
And I think even Shireen Zaman from Ford was on there, and she said on that webinar, she's like we have to have conversations before you just submit an application. Like we
Oh,
have
yeah.
to get to, I mean, which only makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes it's the misconception, or I hear like, well, they don't, I don't know, they don't know if they want to talk to us. Let's
Right.
just go fill out the form on the website.
Right.
But you're painting the picture of a deep relationship. Um,
Uh,
Abba, what other misconceptions do you feel like sometimes maybe a grantee has about the relationship, or
yeah.
has about a funder that you kind of face occasionally?
Yeah. And as you were talking, Sherry, it made me just thinking about what is this? It's on LinkedIn. It's like crappy
Oh yeah,
fundraising.
crappy
Yeah.
funding
Yeah,
practices or
yeah.
something. Yeah,
So I just happened to look at some posts yesterday. I was like, wow, they did that. They really did that. Like making grantee applicants pay for applications and stuff like that.
that's
Um,
nuts.
right, right. So to go back to your question, there to me, it's not a hierarchy, but there are tiers of
Mm,
funders, right? And I
yeah.
think about intermediary funders, which is what a community foundation is, right? I think about, um, private funders. I think about, just different levels of funders. And I'm using this because, like, the closer you are to the community,
Mm,
the difference, I think there's a difference with the level of trust, level of knowledge that's, and again, being a community foundation, like we are right there on the
yes.
ground with the community versus if we were a private foundation, well-meaning, want to, give a grant to some organization in Brookline,
Yep.
but the relation you've got to go through more steps to
Yes.
have that trust in that relationship. So I think with um, grant seekers, it is about sort of the level of proximity in some ways, and
Mm,
obviously that's why with anyone who's fundraising, having those relationships is so important because it's kind of about narrowing the space between you and the funder at whatever level.
yeah.
And with community foundations, like it's I mean, people literally can just come to my office. They have to make an appointment or whatever, but
I
um
hope so. Yeah.
they know that we are part of the community, and
Yeah.
our donors know that we have these really solid relationships with all these organizations. So when they give to us, they know that we know where this money is best needed.
Yeah.
And so they
Yeah.
don't the individual donors don't have to do that work. We've sort of done it for them. And similarly with our grantee partners, and that's why I like to use the term grantee partners
Yeah.
because
Love
they
that.
we are in partnership. I never want to be ignorant of the power dynamics, but
Right.
I really, it's a partnership. We're not on the front lines doing the direct service work, but we are championing them, by bringing donors and funding and
Yeah.
resources to them so that they can focus on that. And it's about understanding their work, what their needs are, what other opportunities there are. I love to take credit for a $500,000 grant that a grantee partner of ours got because of advocacy that I did
Mm,
for other, to other donors, and in this case, the town of Brookline. So it wasn't a grant that came from BCF, but it was
yes.
facilitated because I was able to say, look, there's this awesome program, and they could use the funding and what have you, right? And
Love
so
that.
having that trust in the relationship and just the, knowing that we as a community foundation get the work
Yeah.
that is happening and really understand what the needs are and are actively always trying to stay on top of that, rather than dictate what those needs are. Like that level of trust and partnership, I think, is critical for grantee partners when they are looking for
Yeah.
resources or
Yeah.
other kinds of support.
I hear that in your stories, and I love that phrase, grantee partners. I'm going to do my best to say that from here on out. Um, So
it's a mental model, you know?
it is, but it just makes it's like, oh yeah, of course you are. I'm just envisioning you like linking arms and doing this work together, even though, like you say, you're not direct service. Um, how what has the approach been for the community foundation of like project based, mission kind of themed work versus capacity building or general operating? Like, what has been the or what is your approach in general and kind of those in approaching funding?
That's a great question. I think for me personally, executive director, I'm coming in with a a particular framework that may have been different from my predecessors, may or may not. So, I for me, I'll say, and what I've been pushing, and I'm not saying my predecessors were in disagreement. We've been
Sure.
very much like we will support organizations the best way possible. So, I was actually just on the phone with somebody yesterday who was looking for funding opportunities, and I was like, we have a youth fund, for example,
Mm,
and we have a community fund. And he's like, well, if we want operational support, should I apply to the community fund? And I was like, but if it's a youth program, then apply through the youth fund. Like
yeah.
we're not like so strictly focused on programmatic because we
Yes.
understand that folks need support with database, with payroll, with
Yes.
operations, with all kinds of things in addition to programming. And I think we try to incorporate trust-based philanthropy as a practice. So it's not about dictating, how you're going to use the money for your organization. We trust that you know
Yes.
what you need. That being said, Sherry, we also do want to make sure that programs, because we have limited resources as a community
Sure.
foundation, that they align not necessarily programmatically. I love the breadth of organizations that we
Mm,
support and projects and what have you, but that they align with values. Like we try to look for organizations that are BIPOC led or BIPOC serving, and it doesn't mean we exclusively grant to
sure.
those organizations, but I like to look for. I'm not on the grant making committee per se, but what is kind of like the systemic change that folks are trying to make in addition to just the more immediate needs, right?
Yes.
So we do have to take into account, again, because we have limited resources, what kind of impact is our grant going to have with this organization, in addition to what impact the work will have in the world. we
Yes.
we never question that, but we also, like I said, because of our limited resources, have to think about the best ways that we're
Yeah.
applying our money, and knowing that there's just such a breadth of ways that support can be offered.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
the
isn't
needs are sadly, I feel like the needs are so great that
Yeah,
I'm sure that that decision making process. I mean, it's not easy because you have to turn down great organizations. Like I would imagine.
yes. And with us, again, and being in the community, we have relationships with so many of these organizations. So
Yeah.
it's very hard to say no to organizations that are right, literally,
Right.
figuratively next door to us, or we know, oh my gosh, we love them. They've been doing amazing work, but it just might not make sense
Yeah.
right now for different reasons. So it's again, that proximity goes both ways in terms of like
Yes.
pros and cons.
Yeah.
Um, but generally, yeah, we just want to support the organizations as best we can and trust that
Yeah.
they know what they need.
Yeah. But one topic that's come up in these conversations, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on it. I'm always coaching my clients
Mhm.
to ask a funding partner, if I can say it that way, um, ask for what you need, right?
Mm.
Not versus, well, here's what we think what they'll ask, or I don't think they're going to want us to have more than 10% overhead, or I don't think,
Yeah.
it came up in another conversation. I think it was Shireen, and she said, "Hey, if you need 30% overhead because you're in a year of growth and you perhaps aren't paying competitive wage, in all of these things that we want to fix in the sector, have an honest conversation and let's put that in the proposal and let's be honest about the investment that it really takes to, frankly, change communities and change the world." Um, are people, tell me about like just conversations you're having with people or your approach. You know, I think the probably the crappy funding practice website, if we went on that, it would say like no more than 10%. That's not reality.
That's not reality.
That is not reality. Talk to me a little bit as a representative of a community foundation. What are those conversations you're having, or what are you guys open to?
So I love this because again, it came up very recently. It might have been that same conversation I had yesterday. But I was like, you know, one, I always say, look, I fundraise too, so I get it, right?
Yes.
Like,
You have a need. Yeah.
I understand the strategy or the questioning. Like, if I need 100,000, should I ask for 100,000? Should I ask for 200,000 and hope I get 50? Like what? And I say, so first and foremost, there's a connection there because I'm like, I also am asking these very same questions when I'm looking for funding.
Yes.
But secondly, as far as BCF is concerned, we do say ask for what you need, right?
Mm.
Like, there's no magical formula that really makes sense. I mean, of course, we want to look at, we have like fiduciary legal
Sure.
responsibilities. That's why our donors trust us. So
Yes.
we don't want to necessarily, see that everything is going towards whatever, unless the grant is specifically for like I'm thinking about a group that we've worked with that needed support to like revamp their database. So
Yeah.
that's what it's going to go towards, or hire and there's always trickiness about grant funded positions being, hiring for that.
Yeah.
But that's when we also have conversations like, okay, if you want to, get funding to have this position, what's your long term game after this
Yes.
rolls out
When
after
we're
the
long gone. Yeah.
right, right. So it's about being really honest and also looking at their, current budget, what their needs are. Obviously, explanation in the narrative around their funding request is helpful. Like I said, if it's about having, conversations following up, tell us more about this, or you need X in order to do Y. So what's your strategy here? And I'm totally losing my train of thought right now, but just being able to trust that they know what they need again,
Yes.
and it's not for us to dictate what they need, but just to understand what it is, what the rationale is, and then how we can fit into supporting that if it makes sense.
Yeah. I
The thing
love
that
that.
is tricky with us is, again, because we're a community foundation, and I think this is all funders can relate, that it's the challenge of not having enough
Mm.
resources, right?
Yep.
So there's one thing if you want to spend 30% of on a project for overhead. It's another thing if we're saying, oh, for this particular fund, we're capping the request at 30K, and we still get a request for 200,000 multi-year or something.
Yeah.
Then you have to be like, oh, did you not see
Yeah.
the instructions there?
Yeah. I need you to follow the rules too. Yeah.
We get those occasionally, but
Yeah.
it's still always warrants a conversation and like, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
and sometimes when people meet with me, they think, oh, I got it in with the ED.
Yeah.
So
She liked me. Yeah.
I'm like, I love you, but I'm not breaking any rules for anybody.
I
Um,
love it.
so
I
yeah.
love it. Oh my goodness. Can you just so one of the other topics that this whole series has been so fascinating because I feel like I'm like secretly asking the questions that I my clients ask me all the time. I'm like,
That's
oh,
good.
I'll
Why
ask that too.
you should do? That's what you should be doing.
Good, good. Okay, so I'm new in Brookline, and I feel like I have a mission aligned mission.
Hmm.
Um, do I just send you an email? Do I
Right.
DM you? Do I invite you for coffee? Um, you know, how do I, what's the best way to reach out to you and get a response? If someone is trying to kind of break through and start a relationship with you.
That's an excellent question. And of course, as the ED, I wear a lot of hats. So we have our team has kind of shrunk a little bit over the last couple years, but we have a program and partnerships person who is the first point of contact for people who are interested in grants, who have questions, who submit grants. And so my advice to anybody would be reach out to her, right? First take a
Great.
look at our website, see what we're about, da, 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 da. And then certainly with any follow-up questions, like reach out to our manager of program and
Yeah.
partnerships. Um, it's very common for me to also talk to, again, community partners, people who we have emerging relationships with, or what have you. But I suggest that she's the one that is really much more in the weeds, if you will, with the grant making, the policies, the deadlines, or what have you. So she probably has more information and can
Start there.
start there. Yeah. But we are a small team, so we work very closely.
Yeah.
And I do believe that it is important for us to have relationships with our community
Yes.
partners, whether or not we end up funding them or what have
Yeah.
you. So
Yeah.
it's a
That's good.
balancing act. Yeah.
That's good. Do you believe that people should have, I mean, maybe you kind of just answered that, like multiple touch points at an organization? And sometimes I sense my clients saying, well, they gave me this one, program director. And so I don't want to offend by reaching out to anybody else, not behind their back, but just to make
Yeah.
sure if that person goes away, I
Yeah.
don't have anybody else there who knows me. Do you think that that's wise, whether it be a board member or yourself, or maybe, I don't know, somebody on the fundraising team?
Yeah. I think it's important to be streamlined, right? And because it works both ways. But because we're so small, we all have a lot on our plate.
Yes.
I've been at bigger organizations where there were lots of staff doing, also feeling like they had a lot on their plate. I always think it's good to have somebody else to reach out to. So
Yeah.
let's say for whatever reason our manager of programs and partnerships got sick, or what have you.
Yes.
It would be good to know, like, okay, there's someone else. And right now that is me. I think part of what we want to always explore, but again, being a community foundation, people might reach out to someone on the board because they're friends with that person, or
Yeah.
neighbors, and hey, so and so, I'm looking to get more information about whatever. So that'll eventually come back to staff and through me usually. But yeah, I think it's always good to have more than one person
Yeah.
kind of knowing what's happening. And it's good to be streamlined so that people aren't just reaching out to everybody, which can end up, a little chaotic.
Yeah. Messy, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up here, time is flying. I would love to put that report you guys did in the show notes, if
Oh,
that's
yeah. Yeah.
okay. I feel like
Yeah.
that's just would be interesting for a lot, not only people in Brookline or Boston area to see, but just it could be interesting just for my listeners to see. Um, Abba, could you describe one of those, grantee partners? Um, Gosh, it's like, man, they just kill it every time. Like they're
Hmm.
just doing so many things right. Like, what is it about that relationship that you're like, man, if everybody did that, or maybe it's just like, maybe they're just extra transparent, or
Hmm.
what is that like? Man, they are the kind of
Hmm.
darlings of the group, if you will. And I know you love them all. I know you do. Um,
Yeah, I always try to so I love them all, and I do have
yes,
my
you don't have
favorites.
to name names.
No, I won't name names. But I'm gonna push back a little bit on that question. And also I just
Okay,
wanted to say,
good.
um I'm excited to share the link for our report.
Oh, good.
We, in addition to the report, which, like I said, we did one 10 years ago, and that really was kind of uplifting the poverty rate in our
Hmm.
community, which has since gone down a little bit percentage wise, but the economic vulnerability has increased a lot. So we wanted to, it's not just about who's living at the federal poverty level, but like who is really struggling,
Yeah,
housing insecure, food insecure, all these things. So it's a much bigger number
yeah,
and
I'd
percentage.
love to see that.
But in addition to that, we created a database. It's kind of like an online um, database. We call it a database or an indicators,
Mm,
website where we have those stats, and we can use other information like the American Community Survey, these national sources that can update our data more often than every 10 years
Neat.
with census. So that's something I'd love to share with you. And again,
Yeah.
something that lots of community foundations around the country, around Massachusetts, also have their own versions of these indicator
Great.
databases. So it's really interesting because you can learn so much about a community just through this indicators database.
Great. Yes, please send
Um,
that my way.
yeah, I think it's another unique feature of community foundations. But to your question, the darling. So there are organizations where I'm just like, wow, y'all know how to fundraise. You're doing an amazing job. You got eyes, local eyes, state eye. You're doing really great work.
Yes.
Love that. I also, and I'm pushing back because there are some smaller organizations like maybe no one outside of this community has ever heard of, but they're making
Yeah.
a real impact in the community, right? And they may not be like flush with millions of dollars of a budget, but they have really strong volunteers, and
Yes.
they have a strong commitment, and they're doing hardcore like advocacy within the community for their populations. So it's not like a one size fits all kind of
Yeah.
thing. I think there are some groups that are really trying to push for change and doing it really unapologetically, and I love that. And then there are other groups that are very established, very trusted, and so able to be really creative and both nuanced, but sort of thinking outside the box at the same
Yeah.
time around the services that they provide and what it means to kind of affect and impact change in our community. Um, and then there are just organizations that are really meeting a particular need of folks that we don't necessarily think about or aren't necessarily on our radar. And when you see, one thing I love that we do are donor like site visits. So we bring donors to the organizations, and they get to see like behind the curtain the work, and it's always so inspirational. And people are like, wow, this building, I drive by it all the time, I never knew what was going
Right.
on. And
Education,
yes, impact, because there's so much going on, and there's so many
Yeah.
different facets of our community, and people are doing some really great stuff with very limited resources.
Yeah.
So it's a spectrum.
Yeah, it's the variety. You need all of it, right? Everything you described, the community needs it all, needs it
Yeah,
all.
yeah.
Awesome.
So
Awesome. Abba, how can people find you best? I've told everybody on these, please don't have 1,000 people call you and say, hey, would you fund us? Even though we're in, I don't know, the state of Texas, I don't know. But how should people find you? Tell me that. And then I'll thank you for letting us link to those reports in the show notes.
Of course. So I think the first and foremost, again, going back to education, our website, which is www.brooklinecommunity.org. Actually, we just went
Great.
through a whole rebrand a couple years ago, and our communications director at the time did a fantastic job. So we have a beautiful website. I always think it's just great. A lot of stuff folks can look at. That would be the first step. I actually think getting on our mailing list is great. We do a monthly newsletter, so you can really learn about different aspects of the work we do, stories, people, what have you. And then for folks who are specifically looking for, funding, to kind of reach out to our manager of program and partnerships. If there are folks who are interested in supporting us and supporting the work that we support, like donor partners, I have a person for that as well. So yeah, there's different entry points,
Good.
but I think starting with our website, and I think there is contact at brooklinecommunity.org is
Great.
a central place that, depending on what you're interested in, you can be dispatched to the right person, which may
Good.
end up being me.
Yeah, it might be. If they will be lucky if it is you. Um, we will put the link to your website in the show notes as well. But thanks for the conversation. I
Thank you,
appreciate it. I've
Shelby.
enjoyed it, and just hearing a little bit more about learning. I guess learning a little bit more about your community and just the amazing work that not only you but your partners are doing.
Thank you.
Thanks for your
I'm
time.
honored to be participating in this, and I can't wait to listen to the other ones because I think it's a great series that you're doing.
It is
So
a really good series. I kind of am like, wait, I think I might need to do this next year too. So
yeah,
um, we're dispelling myths over here and having real conversation. So it's been good. Thanks so
great.
much, Abba.